Craven Rand. I'm your Executive Director of Friends of the National Arboretum. Welcome to Digging In. This is our third session of this new virtual series we put together here at FONA. Today we have Lincoln Smith from Forested to talk a little bit about creating forest gardens. I will give Lincoln the proper introduction in a minute, but I wanted to steal a moment to share some updates on the National Arboretum and FONA. First, a couple of housekeeping issues. As you know, this meeting is being recorded. I would ask everyone to stay muted during the presentation. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And as we just discussed, if there's something timely, we'll break in and pose that question to Lincoln. But if not, we'll save those for the end. And we asked all of you to answer a question as you signed up for this session. And that was, what is your favorite native fruit tree to snack on? It appears that figs came out on top on this one, but I appreciate everyone answering the question. I believe I answered fig as well. I grew up with a fig tree in my yard and have enjoyed snacking on them as well, and appreciate everyone's participation in that. Okay, so we'll give you a couple of quick updates on the Arboretum. Visitation is at an all-time high right now. We've had over 30,000 people some weekends here at the Arboretum, and we feel comfortable saying that we will certainly exceed the normal 600,000 visitors to the Arboretum this year. Our green space is more important than ever for local folks that visit, and we appreciate those that come out and visit the Arboretum. Did want to let you know that volunteers are back on the grounds of the Arboretum. We took a break from volunteer service pretty much for the past year, but they're back, and we have them on the grounds of the Arboretum at the Washington Youth Garden as well. So if you're interested in serving as a volunteer for FONA or for the Arboretum, you can check out our website for some details there. The Bonsai Museum, which had been closed for well over a year, has now reopened too. You can visit the museum 10 to 4, 7 days a week. And we're very happy that's reopened, especially for our friends at the National Bonsai Foundation as well. But we encourage you to come out and visit the museum as well. Again, 10 to 4 every day. I did want to publicize that the Arboretum has recently achieved level 4 ArbNet accreditation, which is the highest level of accreditation for Arboretum. And over the 2,000 Arboreta in around, only 34 of those have level 4 accreditation. So that's a big deal for us, and the National Arboretum should be that level 4. So we're very pleased with that accreditation. On the FONA end, for the past year, we've done virtual events like Digging In, and we're obviously glad to do that, and happy those that have been participating in it. But we have decided to ramp up our in-person events moving forward in the second half of the year. You'll have the opportunity to come out and visit the Arboretum for some of these events, so I want to let you know about it. But obviously keep up with your email and come on our website if you have any questions about events. But we'll have a couple of Movies in the Meadow events, and we're partnering with the Japan American Society on a movie on July 22nd and the French Embassy for a movie on August the 5th. So keep an eye out on your email for updates on that, and we hope you can come out and join us. We'll have a 5K run in October, so we encourage you to register for that. If you're unable to join on the day of the run, which I believe is October the 5th, if I remember correctly, you can come out and do a virtual 5K with us as well. We'll have a bulb sale out of the Arboretum on October the 2nd, and a Christmas tree and holiday event in December as well. So keep an eye out again for news on that, but we hope you come out and join us for these in-person events. And then throughout the summer and into the fall, we'll have multiple forest bathing meditation walks coming up. That's run by Anna McGarvey, who's on this session as well. So we encourage you to sign up for that. And then you can always keep up with us through FONA Field Notes and our membership newsletters for more information. And then before I introduce Lincoln, but I did want to let everyone know that we are currently celebrating our 50th anniversary of the Washington Youth Garden. We're working on a garden redesign, which will be the centerpiece of the 50th anniversary celebration, but there'll be some other special activities for program participants and members. So we'll keep you updated on that too. Okay, so we have Lincoln Smith with us today. He is the founder of and runs Forested, which is a 10-acre experimental forest garden in Bowie, Maryland. He and the team test forest gardening methods and design forest gardens for a variety of clients, including private homeowners, schools, and public park administrators. They hold some forest to table events in the garden featuring forest foods like Acorn Falafel. I would certainly encourage you to check out their website, Forested US, and they have some great resources on the site and also have some events coming up as well. I'll remind you these at the end, but he'll have a tour on July 3rd of the facility at 9 a.m., a breakfast out at Forested on July 10th, and then starting on August 28th will be the first course on permaculture, but there'll be some other courses coming up as well. But I'll remind you about that at the end. But again, we're very pleased to have Lincoln Smith with us today. And with that, I'll hand it off to Lincoln. So take it away.
All righty. Thanks so much, Craven, and all for having me. Appreciate it, the opportunity. And I do apologize for my voice has left me partially. So I'll try to keep the volume down and get the ideas across. And let me know if there's any trouble with that. And just a note on the format, I do love to hear from you all during the presentation with your questions or comments, because it helps me remember and feel that you're actually out there, versus me just talking to my own PowerPoint by myself in my office here. So I very much encourage and appreciate anything that comes to your mind during a presentation on forest gardening, and to make it useful to you. Like if you're interested to potentially try out some forest gardening on your place, or you already have a forest garden and you're wondering what works for us here at Forested, by all means, let me know. I don't mind in terms of the flow of the talk if you want to jump in with a question. With that said, I'll share my screen and some pictures of forest garden, and hopefully that will work. Let's play this from the beginning. All right, screen share working?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Cool. Yeah, so we're over in Bowie, just just off of Route 50, same as the Arboretum, actually, same side of the city. So it's only about a 20-minute drive from the Arboretum out to us, if anybody wants to stop by at some point. A forest garden is a type of agriculture that takes on the two different responsibilities of feeding people and restoring an ecosystem. And to me, it's a very exciting approach, because we have this amazing forested ecosystem. That's that we live in a forested ecoregion, where forest is the type of ecosystem that occurs here when you do nothing, when the land will produce that type of vegetation, and that too, that vegetation is what provides all the amazing ecosystem services like cleaning the water and wildlife habitat, sequestering carbon. So it's vitally important that we restore this ecosystem, but we don't tend to think of the forest as a way to get food, as a way to feed people. Our usual approach in our culture to feeding people is to remove the forest and to till the ground and grow the crops that we need, such as corn and wheat and soy. Those are the things that occupy the biggest acreage. And then we will grow orchards too of trees, but they tend to be a single species in a big block. So forest gardening is looking at how can we learn from and work with this amazing native forest ecosystem to produce the food that we need and restore all these ecosystem functions. And our culture has a lot of catching up to do on this. The Piscataway Indians, for example, who lived on the land where I'm located, possibly the Arboretum too, were much more in tune and much better at this than we are presently. The agricultural footprint of people right now is, at least in terms of how much land it takes up, by far the biggest thing that people are doing in the world right now. We consume fossil fuel and have other impacts on the different cycles, like the carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle. But in terms of just displacing ecosystem, you remove the native prairie or the native forest from the landscape and you grow crops. Agriculture is by far the biggest footprint. We also have a significant footprint of our communities, the places where we live, which again tends to displace the local ecosystem. Our forest, though, is really an enviable ecosystem type. Like I have gotten to show these forests to visitors from around the world, and it is a remarkable place that we live. It's well watered, it's biodiverse, and it has so much power and potential food production. So the question that forest gardening asks is, can we restore this forest and feed people in the same landscape? Because at this point, these agricultural lands are occupying about 40% of the world's land, and 40% is significant, especially when you remember that another 20% of the world's land is desert and another 10% is tundra. And then you have steep areas, mountains that are not easily used by people for growing our food. So we are using or exploiting a large percentage of the prairie and forest ecosystems, the sort of the best or the most usable for people lands in the world at this point. It's no longer sufficient to say, okay, we'll set aside lands like the national parks, for example, or a local community park. We'll set aside lands, and that's where the ecosystem can be healthy, and we'll grow our food over here in an ecologically dead zone, like almost ecologically dead zone. That is not a sufficient approach anymore, because we are using such a large percentage of the world's land for our food. It's not in proportion. So what we need to do is bring that ecosystem function back into our actual farmlands. You'll hear a few different terms around related to forest gardening. Another term that people like to call it is a food forest. Myself, I really like this word garden because it's an ancient word that goes back in many different cultures in different forms. A garden representing a balance really between culture and nature, between wildness and civilization. That's, in a Western tradition, you have the Garden of Eden. You have gardens in various Arabic cultures, Chinese cultures, but there's always some word that means that you're striving for something, and maybe it's never quite achieved, but you're trying to achieve that balance. But you'll hear practices like this referred to as agroforestry, agroecology, etc. So just a little bit about myself and the project over here in Bowie. It is a 10-acre parcel, a little more than half of which was a tilled field until the project began in 2012. So the tilled portion of the field looks like a young forest right now. It's very diverse. We grow a whole lot of different young fruit and nut trees in there, together with native vegetation. A lot of it is what you would call early successional plants. Early successional or pioneer plants are the things that get in there and grow in a soil that has been depleted, which this soil definitely was depleted. It was used for tobacco and other crops for hundreds of years, and that removed that exposure of the soil during that time. As you probably know, you lose a lot of your organic matter due to erosion and solarization, et cetera, of exposed soil. So very low fertility in this soil beginning the project. And so it's those hardy, tough pioneer plants getting in there and starting to build up the soil, build up the insect habitat, and get things going. So we're trying to work with that community of plants as much as we can in the process of establishing the forest garden in the open areas. The balance of the property is an existing tulip poplar forest, probably having begun in about the 1920s when it was let go from pasture. So that is a different growing condition. It's much shadier. It's more fertility in the soil. So we grow a different set of crops in the existing forest. We grow a variety of different crops. This is actually from a previous year, but this is about where we are in the season right now, where the blackberries are just starting to come in. It's more of a wintertime view looking down from a tree. The produce is really starting to come online. This has been really neat to see. We are still waiting on some of our slowest to bear things like pecan trees, for example. We have a bunch of the northern hardy pecans, walnuts, acorns, etc. So we're still waiting on those, but meanwhile, we're starting to produce more and more of the vegetables, mushrooms, greens, etc. And it varies throughout the season. Just a few examples here. These are shiitake logs, which are grown in oak. And you have nettles here, which are a wonderful shade crop, that a very nutritious vegetable that grows in the shade. And there's a native nettle that we grow. Hazelnuts, just a little handful of hazelnuts there, sorrel, etc. On my screen, I'm not seeing this whole picture because it's covered up, but we do grow we emphasize native plants here, but we'll grow just about anything that may grow in this climate that's useful to people, as long as it's not an invasive plant or something. So for example, apples. Apples don't tend to be the most happy thing here in the mid-Atlantic climate. But especially given that we do not baby our trees, and we certainly do not spray any herbicides on them. The system is too complex to really baby anything here. So it's got to sort of survive on its own, tough it out, or it doesn't really belong here. So we grow, a small number of very, very ugly, very buggy looking apples that are the tastiest, most amazing, apple-y tasting apples that you're going to find around here. Like many things, if you get it right off the tree, it is a different experience. So that's just a couple of examples. We get to put on these cool forest to table events. We're just actually getting back into this right now, following the pause for COVID. And in terms of our mission and what we get to do here, I'm a plant geek, and as will become more and more evident during this presentation. But the mission here is to reconnect people with the forest and with the fruits of the forest. And for that, I'm so grateful to be able to work with chefs, and notably Michael Costa, who's the head chef at Zaytinya, who has taken some of the weird produce that we grow and made it into really wonderful dining experiences, because it's not easy for people to approach a new food that they've never, a new fruit or something, but he makes it really presentable and fun. So people show up at these dinners and they get appetizers from our volunteer team, and we cook stuff over the fire from the forest garden. This is that Acorn Falafel that you heard about before. The chef makes a lot of falafel at the restaurant, but he finds that this Acorn Falafel is his favorite falafel that he's made. And I won't go way into acorn food. That is a whole topic on its own. But all the Native Americans throughout we have hundreds of species of oak around the world, and at least 60 or 70 native to the United States. All of them are edible if processed correctly to remove the tannin, which is a bitterness in that fruit or nut. And so the chef has made all kinds of wonderful things out of them, including this falafel. He's made granola, bread, noodles, etc. And the acorn is one of those things. It's a staple carbohydrate crop that this ecosystem produces in enormous quantity. And in a per acre quantity that's in the ballpark with wheat. Wheat produces 2,700 pounds of food per acre per year on average in the United States. And acorns, depending on what species you're looking at, are up in that 2,000-ish pounds an acre a year yield range. And the nutritional qualities are similar to wheat that we rely on. So so we're very interested in this. Like what staple foods, what staple tree crops could start to play a role more in our diet here? I mean, we are people that live in the forested ecosystem of the Eastern United States. Can we actually make our living from or sustain ourselves from this ecosystem rather than remove the ecosystem and grow our industrial grain crops? This is a fun example where he's made pawpaw bread with Chickasaw plum jam there in the background. That's a native plum that we found to be very productive. This is a passion fruit flower in the front, very it's a lovely flower, as well as being edible. Hackberry ice cream of all things, and there's some acorn granola. So yeah, we're trying to give people at least a glimpse or a taste of what it is to eat the fruits of the forest, and like, can we move in this direction as a culture over time? Obviously, industrial food system is well entrenched. It's actually an amazing system. I am extremely lucky to always have food for my children, and that at various times in history, people might have starved or wondered whether they're going to have enough food for their children over the winter. And so I don't want to just completely dismiss the amazing industrial food system that brings food from around the world into our grocery stores. It's a privilege to have all that food. I just think we need to be taking on that responsibility that humans are now the most important ecological force in the world by far, and we need to change the practices that we employ on most of these lands in a more agroecology direction. And in a forest ecosystem, that means forest-based agriculture. In terms of forested, at my company, we also do these designs. Lucky to be involved with a whole lot of different cool people from various backgrounds, with various different sort of flavors to why they would want to have a forest garden. One example would be like people that are into herbal medicine. That's not something that I have a lot of knowledge of, but there are all these amazing medicines that grow around here. And I'm happy to work with somebody like that to design a garden that will support that goal. It really is about reintegrating your whole life with the forest, insofar as you can. Start small, obviously, but it's been fun to work with a whole variety of different people and on a whole variety of different flavors of forest garden. This particular one is a pocket park in Hyattsville. I've gotten to do 2 with the city of Hyattsville so far. It's maybe about 5 years in. You can go there and get fruit anytime. I believe there's mulberries ripe in there right now, soon elderberries, blackberries, and you can find that on Google Maps. It's Emerson Street Food Forest. Stop on by and help yourself pull a few weeds while you're there if you like. But this was a project of the former mayor of Hyattsville, Candace Hollingsworth, here with a green shirt. She had this vision that there should be a food forest in every ward of Hyattsville. And it's interesting, like a small pocket park food forest is not going to feed all the people in that neighborhood everything they need, but it does give the people growing up in that neighborhood and their parents the opportunity to harvest, to have that experience of harvesting some of their own food. They can get substantial amounts of in-season produce that would be expensive to buy at the grocery store. And it just establishes a certain connection to the land that can be missing from some of our urban neighborhoods. So Candace had this really cool vision, and her team of public works has made these forest gardens, these food forests, start to grow in Hyattsville. I've gotten to do various other ones around the region too. I'll pause in case, I don't know if you're seeing, like Craven, if you're seeing any comments or questions or objections in the chat.
Certainly no objections, but no questions as of yet, but I'm keeping an eye on it.
All right, cool. Well, throw them in there if you get any questions. Next, I'll just talk a little bit about like, how do we look at this forest and then try to design an agriculture system that works like the forest, but doesn't drive us completely crazy and is not total chaos. This is what I've been wrestling with throughout my involvement with forest gardening. So I'll try to give you some idea of that, and then follow that up with some examples of my favorite kinds of fruits, the things that have both grown the most happily for us and actually taste good or are usable at the end of the presentation. So, so we are familiar with this idea of forest succession, how the land will turn itself into forest. And we do, as I've been saying in our normal agriculture practices, we stop that. But there's all this amazing push in this landscape. A piece of land, it pushes toward forest as hard as it can if you leave it alone. And it takes a lot of mowing and spraying, et cetera, tilling to stop that land from turning into forest. So forest gardening looks at like, okay, how can we work with this energy? And that said, we are working in the sort of mid-successional range for the most part as a state that we're aiming for, more so than a mature closed canopy forest. And this is because a lot of the crops that we want to grow, the berry fruit, the berry bushes and stuff, they do require some light that comes down into the lower layers of the forest. And so if I'm working in an existing forest, I may harvest some trees out of there for lumber, which I think is a useful and sustainable, if it's done right, it's a sustainable way of interacting with our forest ecosystem. Like I was lucky to find a big wild black cherry tree that had come down in a storm. And it's a beautiful, you may know this wood, like cherry wood is valuable and beautiful red color. So I found a guy who was willing to take that one huge tree, it filled up his whole truck. And then he made a table out of it and kept the other, bartered for the rest of the tree. And I got to have a table. And that opens up, like the removal of that tree by the storm, or even by just going in and harvesting it yourself, it opens up that light into the lower layers. You can grow. There are things you can grow in a very mature closed canopy forest. It has important ecosystem benefits. But it's interesting that forest ecologists have found that the forest is actually at its most productive in this sort of mid to middle late succession phase. That's when it's producing the most biomass per year. It's sequestering carbon the fastest at this phase. It's building the soil the most quickly. So we're aiming to mimic this, and it does involve some thinning and trying to maintain light coming into the lower layers of the forest. Succession is it's a real force. So if you've seen fields that have been let go and what they turn into, they'll turn into wall to wall, thousands and thousands of little seedlings very quickly. So we're trying to work with that, and we do pick and choose selectively which plants we're going to keep and which we're going to remove. But even when we do remove young trees, those things, even if you let it grow for just a year or two and then maybe you knock it down, you bush hog it or something, that's just doing so much to build up the soil. It's so necessary. Adding that material, they're breaking up the compaction in the soil from this tillage, from the legacy of tillage. Their root systems are breaking up that compaction and adding organic matter. So it's an amazing process and a very important part of how the forest builds itself. So we try to work with it while keeping it organized enough that we can get our crop plants growing. We also work hard to establish habitat for as big a variety of different insects and the higher levels of the food chain that all rely on the insects. And that starts with native plants, native flowering plants, as much diversity as we can, blooming as often as possible. And I'll give you a few examples of these as we go along too. We do construct the garden with layers, mimicking the layers of the forest. You don't find just one species growing in the forest. You find tall trees growing with smaller trees and shrubs and vines and little herbaceous things, all growing together, occupying different niches. So we're trying to create a layered growing system that's just organized enough that we can get in and harvest from it. We try to look for interactions between plants where they are beneficial to each other, or at least partitioning the available resources. In this little patch that you're looking at, we do pay some attention to solar orientation. Same as you would find a solar, like a field full of solar panels, they're all going to face south. We create these sort of solar panel-like things. So we have taller vegetation here, like a taller tree, and then shorter trees, shrubs and veggies stacked so that they layer and face south. So like the shade of this big tree, it's going it's going northward. It's not going to shade the vegetable garden. So this is just, it's a young patch yet. The pattern will become more apparent as it grows. But this is a pattern that we use throughout the forest garden, trying to make sure that we're getting our light into our lower layers. Up above everything. Right now it's still small, but it's growing together with this Chickasaw plum, which is a much smaller stature tree. Even smaller than that is the high bush cranberry and the American hazelnut. So it's a young patch, but you can see that the different layers are here, and as they grow, we'll remove as this pecan tree gets taller until it's maybe, if I live to be 80, 90 years old, this thing could be 80 feet tall and 100 feet wide. We'll see. But we remove the lower branches as it grows so that there's plenty of room underneath it for this Chickasaw plum to continue producing its plums. And we encourage the pecan to produce its crop up high in the canopy.
Lincoln, we have a question.
All righty.
How long would it take to naturally restore soil of lawn that one could grow a forest garden?
From a lawn, you said?
Yes.
Well, I'll have a couple other examples of soil building techniques in this presentation, but in terms of how long, if you want to give your soil a quick boost, there are many things in the urban waste stream that you can use to at least build the fertility on top of your beat up old soil. So I would highly recommend using things like wood chips and coffee grounds, compost. You can collect food scraps from your neighbors and make compost, and all of that can build up the soil. Wood chips are especially nice because they resemble how the forest builds soil. How the forest builds soil is it's the plants grow and they live and they die and they rot down, and that accumulating organic matter is what builds up the fertility of the soil. There are also special plants, nitrogen fixers, that are always an important part of the early successional process where they're building up the fertility of the soil. They're like little fertilizer factories. And that's going to include all the legumes and stuff like that. If you can get free wood chips all day long around here. And that is sort of an accelerated version of what the forest is doing over time. And you can complement those wood chips and the heavy carbon that they bring with sources of nitrogen like coffee grounds or food scraps. But a lot of the fertility you can grow in place. So if you have a lawn and you want to start getting it more fertile, I would definitely also include in your landscape, besides the mulch that you might bring in and the wood chips, the compost, include in your landscape some plants that build soil, like some early successional pioneer plants. And I can send you a whole list of all the different ones that we've tried here at Forested. Just send me an email afterwards and I will be glad to share that list. But examples include a lot of things in the legume family, like a black locust tree is pumping fertility into the soil. Alder trees are another nitrogen fixer, bayberry. Smaller ones would include partridge pea, clover. All of these things are going to be very helpful in making your soil habitable for the fruit trees that you want to grow there. Oh, well, look at that. So here's, forgot that I had slides about this. I could have been flipping through these while I mentioned that, but I love that partridge pea. That's a native, the clover is not native, but it's pretty broadly naturalized. But the partridge pea is a native plant that reseeds itself, and you can tell from the leaves probably that it's a legume, and it's small of stature. Some of these nitrogen fixers are pretty big and aggressive. This is a little guy, you know, it'll spread and form a pretty thick population, but they're very easily pulled out. They don't make a very deep aggressive root system or anything. So I like it as a companion plant, the yellow flowered partridge pea here, because as a companion, like let's say it's spreading into an area where you don't want it, you can just easily yank them out. They're such an easy plant to pull out of the ground. And every time you pull one out and drop it on the soil, it's adding fertility. So pretty nice companion. Comfrey is another nice one. This is an accumulator, a mineral accumulator. It's not a nitrogen fixer, but if there's phosphorus and potassium, et cetera, down in the subsoil, it'll go find it and bring it up into its leaves, which then eventually rot. And, you know, they drop off at the end of the season, rot, and feed the soil there. And it's fun. These mineral accumulating plants, they're also the things that my ducks and geese prefer to eat above everything else. So it kind of, you can send the leaves to a lab and they'll tell you what's in them. And it's like, oh, this is stuff that is enriching the soil. Great. Or you can just watch what the ducks do. The ducks come into a new pasture, like I rotate them around the forest garden. And when they come into a new area, they immediately go and find all the comfrey and they eat it down like this plant here on the right. The plant will be fine. It'll grow back after the ducks leave. But the ducks are great in terms of they eat that. They stimulate the plant to keep growing. They go ahead and digest that and poop it around the place and build up the soil. Other examples of mineral accumulators are dandelions, yarrow, and these things tend to be enjoyed by the wildlife too. Couple other examples. We'll get to the crops shortly, but forest gardens really are about the diversity and growing a variety of support plants that make the whole system healthier. This is another nitrogen fixer you could try. It's called false indigo bush. This is a bush where, like many of these, you can cut it all the way back to the ground, take all this nutrient-rich, this nutrient-rich foliage, add it to your compost or just spread it around your fruit trees to add a trickle of fertility into that soil, and the bush will regrow. Nine bark is an important native pollinator support plant. So we grow a bunch of plants that are there specifically to support populations of beneficial insects that help the forest garden overall. These are very popular with native bees and wasps, that we want in the system. The flowers, that is. And indeed, when you see flowers of that format, sort of looking like Queen Anne's lace or whatever, that umbel, where it's a flat topped, often white colored flower, those tend to be beneficial to or attractive to native wasps. And you might think of the annoying yellow jackets or whatever, those kind of wasps. In fact, there are many hundreds of species of wasps, many of which are going to go eat your pest insects. And that's key, because these wasps, at other times of their life cycle, they need nectar. They need these plants as well as their insects to eat. Winterberry holly is an important, and there are many, but this is an important wintertime bird food. Obviously, we want as many birds around the forest garden as possible, again, to help out with eating pests, and that they're an end in itself, like just providing bird habitat is something that a forest garden can do well. I have a neighbor who has a good zoom lens on a camera, and it's been fun to see his pictures of birds in the garden over the years. We had the bluebirds on site at the beginning of the project, and you can see they go around all day and catch insects, which can damage the crop. So, we want to have habitat for these guys. Indigo buntings have been neat because they were not on this particular property when the project began, but they like that early successional forest. So as it turned from a cornfield / empty field into a young forest, the indigo buntings moved in. So that's been really fun to see. And there are many other examples, some of which I notice, and then you just walk into the place and you get the sense. Well, anyway, the diversity is increasing, and I can only tell you about a slice of it, which is part of the joy and the fun of it for me. Hummingbirds, by the way, they eat a lot of insect pests too. So feed your hummingbirds with stuff like the red honeysuckle, the native coral honeysuckle, and they will return the favor by eating a bunch of your pests. So yeah, we just we try to have patches of native perennials wherever we can to help support these populations of insects. Here's another fun one. This is blue-winged wasp nectaring on goldenrod. This in its adult phase, it eats nectar. It doesn't, but nectar is its only food supply. But then once it's mated and completed its flying phase, it goes into the soil and finds a Japanese beetle larvae specifically and lays its egg into the Japanese beetle larvae, and the wasp larvae consumes the Japanese beetle. We had a tremendous problem with beetles the first 2 years. The Japanese beetles ate every leaf off of these brand new little fruit trees. Some of the first trees that I planted into this empty field, you know, it was just like empty field of grass starting to grow, and these little fruit trees and the beetles. And the beetles ate every leaf off of my little cherry trees, grapevines and other things. And, you know, I was out there shaking beetles off, and they would take every leaf, and then the tree would try to grow a new set of leaves, and they take all the new leaves too. Lost some trees that way. And it was annoying. But we have not, so that was 2012 and 13. We have not had another bad beetle year since then. And I think it's in no small part due to the increased diversity of predators around the garden. These things will never eat every single Japanese beetle, but they do definitely blunt the population spikes. And in order to have any of these wasps around, you need to have goldenrod. Many of these beneficial insects, they only eat one plant or one family of plants. So they can only nectar on goldenrod, or like monarch butterflies, you're probably very familiar that their larvae will only consume milkweed. It's true of very many of these insects that you want to have around. So the goldenrod is a big help to the cherry trees via this wasp. Here's another cool predator. I've seen these eating Japanese beetles too. It's an assassin bug. A lot of these, they have a variety of different habitat needs. So the more diversity you have in the landscape, the likelier it is that something like this can move in. Because it can't, like, very likely this cannot survive in a monoculture apple orchard. Certainly it cannot survive if you're spraying everything. It's going to be killed along with everything else. You know, let's say it's an unsprayed monoculture. There's apple pests in that landscape, but not a whole lot of other food, right? So it's unlikely that you'd find these predators living and helping with your apple pests in a monoculture situation, because as soon as the apple pest has completed its life cycle, there's nothing for this thing to eat, and there's no place for it to overwinter, and there's no place for it to put its eggs, etc. So we don't even necessarily have to understand the specific, and it's impossible to understand the specific habitat requirements of hundreds of different species. But if you allow the native vegetation to return and you work on diversity, these things will tend to reappear, which is just a delight.
Lincoln, you got another question?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, and this is something I was thinking too. Did you introduce the blue-winged wasp to deal with the Japanese beetle infestation, or did you plant things like the goldenrod that would attract the wasps? Is it just planting, or did you have to do some introduction?
Great question. I have never brought in any insects, just done the planting, and they find their way in, which is cool. I have wondered about it sometimes. Trying to think of an example. Like we had something killing off our persimmon trees. It's a persimmon borer. It looks a lot like the peach tree borer. And there is a nematode that goes after that. And I thought about importing those. But, you know, over time, the damage has been reduced. I think the nematode and other predators on that persimmon borer have probably also found their way into the landscape. So for myself, I haven't had to or chosen to do importing of the actual predatory beneficial species. I've just planted their habitat requirements. Thanks for the question. It's a great question. I think there could be good reasons to import beneficials sometimes. Here you're looking at one species of spider web, which is kind of fun. When the dew hits the ground and the light is at just the right angle, you can sometimes like suddenly become aware of something that's out here. So if you can imagine, like this was years ago, when the trees were all small. But if you're a pest insect going and trying to damage my crop, you have a decent likelihood of running into one of these webs. And this is just one of the many, probably dozens of species of spider living in this landscape. And they occupy one niche, but there are other spiders occupying other niches, also waiting to help out by reducing the pests. Here's, you see lots of these around this time of year. This is a wolf spider. You can see all the young little wolf spiders riding along on the abdomen there. Very creepy and but also very helpful. These things don't even make nests. They just hunt. They just walk around on the ground and hunt that way. They don't make webs, that is to say. It's also been fun to see the gray tree frogs come in to the landscape more so as time goes on. They can make their way out. As long as there's enough vegetation, they can make their way into a patch of the landscape that they didn't occupy previously. Obviously, these guys are out there eating pests as fast as they can. And the ducks too, they have a role to play. These eat slugs. They love to eat slugs, which in turn reduces the damage on some of my vegetables, and definitely the mushrooms. Slugs are a huge pain in the neck when you're trying to grow shiitake mushrooms, and the ducks do their part by eating slugs. So it's fun how many connections you can find. This, by the way, is an apple tree in the foreground, and you can see one companion plant just starting to emerge from the ground is yarrow. Yarrow accumulates minerals, and it is a food source for beneficial predatory wasps when it blooms. Yeah, and so the final thing I'll say about in terms of the principles of a forest garden is that, as I mentioned, I came to this from a plant geek perspective and an environmentalist perspective. Like, we need to restore the environment. We need to get these plants back in the landscape. But what I've come to find out, my particular feeling about it is that environmentalism needs to be about people and reconnecting them with the landscape. And I think that this is a broadly held idea these days, but it wasn't necessarily always so. Like, the early environmental movement in the United States was very much like, oh man, we have a problem here. People are killing the whales and destroying the forests, and therefore people are terrible. The best thing people can do is get out of the landscape, like preserve the land from people, right? And that's how we got our national parks. And I think those are great. I'm glad to have them. But the next step is we need to go further than that. It's like, no, getting people out of the landscape is not the best solution. The best solution is to reintegrate people with the ecosystem. We need to remember how to be a positive keystone species. And there are plenty of examples where people's activities have enhanced the local ecosystem. There's a really cool article, and the study behind it came out in the last month or so, where they studied the forest gardens created by Indians in the Pacific Northwest centuries ago, and those Indians having been forcibly removed from the land 150 years ago at this point. They can still find those forest gardens there, where you'll be walking through the existing forest, which I forget what the species composition out there is, but it tends to be evergreens in Pacific Northwest. And then you'll come upon a patch where it's much more biodiverse, and there are considerable edible species represented. Even 150 years later, these systems have still persisted, and they are still a pool of higher biodiversity in that patch than the surrounding forest. The Indians, for example, in that example, they brought hazelnuts from some distance away to plant in their communities, so that you find these populations of hazelnuts outside of their otherwise contiguous range elsewhere in these communities. So forest gardens can be a very resilient and indeed beneficial net positive to the ecosystem and biodiversity, we can totally do this. And it begins with with the people. And for me, you know, in Bowie, Maryland, like having the people into the garden, it really brings the place to life. It makes it fun. Different people obviously have different levels of comfort with the forest and with being outdoors, but a lot of them love it and enjoy it. And to me, a forest garden that doesn't have people in it isn't really doing its job. So, and this is something that I came to sort of more slowly over time. I didn't realize how important this was, but like solving the people problem and making it a habitable place. It needs to be designed from the beginning with the people in mind, and like it should be a good habitat for people and a fun place to be. So that's come to be something that I feel strongly, and it's one of the most enjoyable as well as one of the most challenging aspects of doing a forest garden. So this is we're doing inoculation of shiitake mushroom logs, where you drill a bunch of holes in a log and then you place the spawn of that mushroom into the log, and then about a year later you start to get the mushrooms growing out of that log. We're harvesting them these days right now because it's summertime. They're just a wonderful mushroom. This is Acorn Harvest with my kids and some of their cousins and friends. We don't have much in the way of acorns growing in the forest garden in Bowie yet, so we pick them up all over the DC region. I try to pick up a few 100 pounds of them every fall. Sometimes I picked up a couple of 1,000 pounds. They're just all over the place. And it does vary year to year how good the crop is on the different species. But they store really well. So I'm still, like I've processed acorns that once they're dried, a couple of years ago, I finally finished using up my 2013 harvest. So I think they were like 5 years old at that point and still like great. So in terms of a carbohydrate food, storability is important, and these things are very storable, at least some of the species.
All right, we got another question.
Yeah,
here.
okay, go ahead.
All right. Is it possible to build a mini forest garden in an urban backyard on less than 1/4 of an acre?
Yes, totally. In that case, you want to be, start with whatever you're most inspired about, because you won't be able to, and I've made this mistake. I mean, that's how I forest garden I had probably almost 1/4 of an acre available in my yard to plant by the time you subtract the septic field. Like I'm on a septic field and you're not allowed to plant trees on top of your septic. So I wanted to plant my favorite 300 different species of trees, and so I tried. Anyway, I ended up over planting the place pretty significantly. So don't do that if you can avoid it, because your plants won't be happy in the long run. But yeah, you can absolutely grow a patch or two. Try to include plants of different sizes together. You can plant two fruit trees 4 feet apart from each other if one is going to get really tall and the other one's going to stay smaller. Like you can stack your fruit vertically that way. That doesn't mean plant 2 apple trees 4 feet apart from each other. At least not 2 standard size apple trees that are going to try to become, good sized plants, unless you have a particular aggressive pruning regimen in mind. So don't crowd your plants, but you can stack them thoughtfully. Maybe that's not a total answer. I could go way into that, but you definitely can plant small forest garden patches in an urban environment. And I've seen very productive and very lush and beautiful examples of this. Thanks for the question, by the way. The one way to choose the plants that you're going to grow is try to counter the familiarity breeds contempt tendency. One thing that grows wild around here, and specifically on my site in Bowie, is American persimmon. They occur by the hundreds. They just pop up with nobody having planted them, and it makes a decent fruit. I don't know if any of you have tried a persimmon, like a wild American persimmon. They're okay, but it's like the land is producing them in great abundance. So based off of this, it's like, okay, the land here really wants to produce persimmons. The climate, the soil, everything, these plants are thriving with nobody planting them. How can we work with that? Well, turns out that people have made selections of persimmon. This one is Proc, and you can see they've selected it for a much bigger fruit and it actually has less seed in it too, compared to the wild one. They're both good fruits, but this one is a lot easier to use. So the wild plants that are growing here are telling me this should be a persimmon farm. And it's like, okay, but we can grow something that's a little bit easier for people to eat. So take a look at your local neighborhood and your local parks and see what is growing there, and use those indicator plants to guide you, or at least potentially influence what you would tend to grow in your backyard or other site, because you'll have to work a lot less hard if you work with what really wants to grow there already. Sure, you can, like, let's say let's say you're living in a sort of a swampy property. You can work to build up mounds and grow apple trees on there, but they do not like having their roots, they do not like having wet feet or growing in wet soil. But your whole woods is probably already all full of pawpaw trees anyway. So maybe work on like accept that that's what your site really wants to produce, and try to see all the different varieties of pawpaw trees, see if there's one that you like. Learn to use pawpaws in different recipes, etc. And I'll show you a picture. For those of you that don't know what pawpaw, I'll have a picture of that in just a second. But basically, you can't grow everything on your site. So just try to learn what's especially suited to your area, and try to learn to love that, as well as the things that you already know you love, and try to grow those. One step further removed from the American persimmon is Asian persimmon, another amazing species, and compatible as a graft. Like, I can graft this Asian persimmon onto some of our wild American persimmon fruit. I think I have a picture of that in just a second, the grafting. Again, okay, so we have this invasive plant around here that some of you may have noticed, one or two of in your travels, called the Bradford Pair. This is a crazy ornamental pear, if you like that sort of thing, that was introduced by the Department of Agriculture starting in the 50s and 60s, planted aggressively, and now it goes absolutely nuts and takes over every vacant lot and abandoned field. In this photo, you can see the white flowers that show you where these plants are occurring in this particular landscape. It makes a small fruit that is bitter and unpleasant. Okay, so not a wonderful plant to have in the landscape. But it is a very graftable plant. So every fruit tree, if you order it from a nursery, most of them are going to come to you, they're grafted. And that means that they've attached a superior selection of whatever your fruit is to a rootstock, so that plant will be a reliable fruit producer for you. If you buy yourself a pear tree from a nursery, it is very likely to come to you already grafted onto Caloriana rootstock, which is the same species as the Bradford pear that you see growing all over the place around here. So with these Bradford pears, there's a simple technique you can use called bark grafting, where you cut that thing down and you attach sticks from a good variety of fruiting pear, and in a couple of years, the graft will attach to that under fruit, and it will make this beautiful, delicious edible fruit. Either Asian pears or European pears, they're both compatible with Caloriana as a rootstock. So it's something that's fun to try, and I guarantee you all have Calori pears in your neighborhoods, unless you're from very outside of this region. This spring I did an experiment where I was driving around the Beltway. I drove about a quarter of the Beltway, and my question for myself was, is there any point on this journey where I cannot see a Bradford pear blooming from where I am? And there was no such point. Like, I could see a Bradford Pear blooming from during the entire however many miles that was. So they're ubiquitous. It's an invasive plant. Great thing to learn grafting on. Very fun, and they become very productive after grafted, and not invasive anymore either. Like this graft, like the Asian pears are not invasive.
All right, we've got another question.
Sure.
Our backyard was leveled with 2 to 3 feet of gravel before we moved in. We are reclaiming it, and the clover seems to be doing well, but digging down to soil requires way too much effort. Any suggestions for building soil on top of gravel, and any other plants like clover that could perhaps help with that?
Wow, that is a lot of gravel. 2 to 3 feet of gravel. Well, I would be choosing my plants carefully. There are some things that are going to like the super fast drainage that gravel is providing. There's all kinds of plants that you can grow your fertility there, and I would probably also be importing like a lot of mulch and stuff to try and get it going, to get it started. Vetch comes to mind. That's an aggressive nitrogen fixing plant that you will see in conditions like that. Yeah, any of the nitrogen fixers would be something good to try. And then in terms of the fruit that will like if you get a pocket of fertility going on top of that, some things do really appreciate that fast drainage. And if you can do a rain barrel or something that leads to your fruit trees, because they'll be losing that water out the bottom of the soil profile, out the bottom of their growing area pretty quickly. So you could hook up a rain barrel with a soaker hose to augment their water, or if not a soaker hose, at least a trickle into the area. But yeah, it sounds like you're going to be planting into the gravel itself. Prickly pear cactus comes to mind. We, believe it or not, we have a native species, Opuntia humifusa, is a prickly pear that's native to this region, the eastern United States. And you can get selections of them. You can look at Oikos tree crops if you want. Oikos is spelled like the yogurt brand. And that makes an edible green and an edible fruit. There are some that have been selected to be a little bit less spiky to make the processing of the greens easier. The pads, they're called. But yeah, that's a very interesting, challenging environment to grow in. But yeah, I would definitely look at some of the prickly pears. They make a really lovely fruit if they're happy.
All right, well, I want to be mindful of time. We're a little after 1 o'clock, but Lincoln, I'd like to know sort of what the future holds for Forested. I mean, you've done a lot over the 10 years, and I mean, you had a vision for the place. And what's next for Forested, and what do you want to accomplish, say, over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for keeping an eye on the time. Well, in some ways, I think we're just hitting our stride. Like we're just starting to get our nut crops. It's typical to take 10 years. But we're starting to measure our yields in a bit more systematic way, because we want to show that a forest garden can make as much food per acre as we just want to see how much we can produce per acre, like to add to the conversation about this, because many people will be like, if you want to feed the world, forest gardening is all very well, agroecology, it's fine for you well-fed Westerners, but if you want to really feed the world, we need industrial agriculture and giant combine harvesters and the whole thing. I don't think that's actually a complete picture. I do acknowledge that it's going to take a very long time for forest gardening to play a role in competition with, or whatever, in that environment of cheap industrially produced food. So we want to do as much as we can to see what we can discover, see what we can contribute to the conversation. And that starts by tracking our yields, which I think are going to be rising into the next decade, the second decade of the project, as the nut trees come online. So I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm just going to flip real quick. It's going to be less than a minute. I want to show you a few more fruits. That's pawpaw. That's passion fruit. That's a native passion fruit that grows around here. I highly recommend it. Bush cherry is a nice front yard plant. Kids love it. Black raspberry fruits in the shade. Chickasaw plum carefree and wonderful cooking plum. Chestnuts, I love. Clove currants. Wine cap mushroom is the easiest one to start with. You grow it in wood chips. There's shiitakes. We have volunteering here at the Forest Garden every Friday and Saturday. Love to have you out. Bring your kids. You don't have to work the whole time. You don't have to work at all if you don't want to. Just come hang out. It's fun. And we do have a few other events coming up that you can find on our website. We also have a Forest Garden design guide that you can download for free from the website. And I'm very glad if anybody has follow-up questions, feel free to send me an email. We have various, like lists of resources and nurseries and whatnot that we use. I'd love to support you on your forest garden projects if there's any way that I can do that. We do. I'll just mention in terms of upcoming, we do have a tour this coming Saturday. We're starting at 9 a.m. Try and get it in before the day becomes too hot. But love to have you out this Saturday at 9 a.m. if you'd like to come.
All right. One last question here, and I hope I can pronounce this correctly. Have you grown Castanea pumila?
That would be, shoot, is that the chinkapin? Let me look that up. I know it's a chestnut of some kind. The chinkapin does not grow well for me. I have tried it. Let's see. I'm just Googling Castanea pumila. Which one is that? Yeah, it's chinkapin. Yeah, for whatever reason, I've tried them. They grow well. I've tasted them. They're nice, tasty fruit. It's like a little chestnut shrub. I have not been able to get them going and happy on my site. Maybe your site is more suited than mine. So that's a slightly regretful no. I've had much more luck with the Chinese chestnut and a little bit of promise on the hybrids. I don't have the American Chinese hybrids from the Chestnut Foundation. I have them from other people and they're doing okay, but jury's still out on those.
All right, Lincoln, I first want to thank you very much. My gosh, to come in and share all this time with us and our members, we very much appreciate it. I would encourage everyone to visit Lincoln's website, forested.us, and also know that his site is only about 20 minutes up Route 50 from the Arboretum. So come out there and visit. Obviously, you have that volunteer opportunity. And then the 3 events that I mentioned earlier, I want to cover those again. He's got a tour on July 3rd at 9 o'clock. He has a breakfast on July 10th. And then on August 28th starts a course on permaculture, and there'll be some other courses beyond that. But again, Lincoln, we're so appreciative of your time today and your coming on and sharing all your experience and all about forested with our members. And I want to thank all our members that joined us today as well. It's because of you that enables us to do things like this and our great work out of the Arboretum. So we thank all of you too. But a great day, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the afternoon. And we'll see you again soon with the next version of Digging In. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Right.
Take care.
Everybody have a great day.